right, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome out to another presentation. My name is Logan. I'm going to be your tour guide. I'm laughing because this presentation has got me really in a state of bliss. Because what I just found, and I'm going to show you, is going to blow your freaking mind. And this should cement it again, not that we haven't done that already, that we live inside of a scripted reality. So this presentation on the S4, the Bob Lazar story, is what we're going to be talking about. I want to let you know this came out in the United States on April 3rd, the same exact day that I put out, or I should say we, put out our They Live 2.0 Decoded, which I already released on the Patreon. I already told you all of you that. I didn't know this was coming out. I honestly had no idea that this was coming out. Matter of fact, when I posted the They Live, I saw the Joe Rogan podcast pop up with Bob Lazar, and I posted it on the Patreon for all of you. So let's get started with this one because I know you're chomping at the bit. I do want to let you know that if you are a donating member, you have access to over 171 posts right now. But these are not in exactly this order, but this is kind of the alien presentations. Yes, it does involve theology. The book of Genesis, the Torah, yep, has everything to do with religion. So we covered the X and Y, the chromosomes, our DNA, and talking about perhaps being made underground. So make sure you check these out if you haven't watched them. Okay, so let's get started, and I want to jump in. And this is what had me laughing. Just at last minute, this was the last thing that I found before I came on here to shoot this presentation, and it popped into my head: Ancient Aliens. You know this show; it's been running for 8 seasons. The man George. Just that name alone is huge. You can decode this guy right here and have a freaking field day. The host. Are you guys ready? This is how scripted this entire reality that we are playing out is. Before I jump into the first slide, I'm going to do it on the fly. I'm going to show you. This is what I just found. This is why I was laughing. Ancient Aliens came out on March 8th, 2009. The creator or the producer is Kevin Burns. And he owns this entertainment company called Prometheus. Have you ever seen the movie Prometheus? Yeah, well, in the beginning, the alien is by the water and it breaks open and spills, and the DNA gets spilled into the waterfall. I'm not saying that's true. That's Ridley Scott's 2012 movie Prometheus. But anyway, this guy right here, Kevin Burns, has this company called Prometheus Entertainment. I wonder why he chose that name. I'll show you. And then he's the producer of Ancient Aliens, which comes out on March 8th. So let's just take a look at Kevin Burns. Here he is. His birthday was on June 18th, 1955. Now, I have a really good friend of mine who has that same birthday and was abducted by aliens. That is a fact. I'm not trying to make this up. All right? And this guy passes away, coincidentally, of course, on September 27th. The same day as the founding date of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, which are a huge proponent. These are the militants of the church. Why are church and aliens intertwined? And of course, this sits on the same coordinates as the Vatican, 41 degrees north, and you're going to see that. So the formation of the Jesuits was on the 27th of September, which is the passing date of Kevin Burns. Coincidentally, obviously. It's always coincidental. But that's not what else we found. What else we found was Kevin Burns was born in this city right here. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because it's a pretty tough one. Which is absolutely fascinating because this guy right here, you know who this dude is. Huge alien guy. David Wilcock was born in Rotterdam, which is in the county of the same city that the producer of Ancient Aliens was from. Coincidence? Is it a coincidence? Now, I want you to use logic and critical thinking, right? What would the odds be that this man right here, who is all about aliens, is from a birth city that is in the town or the county of the birth city of Kevin Burns, who created Ancient Aliens? This guy. What do you think the odds would be? Well, there are no coincidences. And again, if you go and break down Giorgio here, I'll let some of you go do that. They don't even list his birthday, but he's Greek. So you're going to get Zeus involved, and Prometheus is Greek, of course. Prometheus is Greek. This was produced by Prometheus Entertainment, created by Kevin Burns, who has the birth city that is tied to none other than the huge guy David Wilcock. Yeah, scripted reality, folks. Scripted to the max. Scripted reality. So there you go. And that's not it. That's I'm just getting warmed up. How about this one? Now let's get into some Torah. The most popular book in the world is the Bible. It is the most proclaimed, most preached, most prayed upon, most talked about, most debated. And you get Judaism in here. What would the Jews have to do with Christianity and the Society of Jesus? You're going to find out. See, Ancient Aliens has the numerology, which is exactly the same three numbers as the very first time the Elohim come on the scene to create man. The very first time man is talked about, let us make man in our image, is in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26. I wonder why. Did they name it because of this? I mean, that's a pretty common title, right? Ancient Aliens. I mean, it's nothing unique about it. But we live in a scripted reality, so nobody has to try to do anything. And what I thought was fascinating about this scripture, and I've studied this high and low so much that, and you're going to see this. This is important because it has to do with water. Let's read this. It says, and God, Elohim, this is actually Elohim. And Elohim said, let us, plural, make man in our, plural, image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Now, the big standout is the very first thing that mankind is given dominion over, which is the fish. Now, this is important because who was Jesus? He was a fisher of men. He walked on water. He was born during the Piscean age, as were all of you and I. And it's dominion over the sea. It could have been the air first. It could have been the earth first. Nope. It was the sea first. Why the water? Well, we're made up of water. DNA is primarily water. But you're going to see why that water is in the beginning of this. I'm telling you, folks, this is how you have to have the eyes to see, and you got to pay attention to as many things as you can, and we're doing that. And so we looked up this word sea in Hebrew. We do the numerology of it. And not only does it have 23, 23 in me and DNA. Remember in Prometheus, he spills the DNA in the water, the waterfall. But you see, it's the letters Yod and Mem. And here it is in Phoenician, because you got to go back and look at the hieroglyphics in ancient Egypt and Phoenician. And the Yod is the arm, the hand, and Mem is what? The water. So what is this saying? Elohim says, let us make man after our image and our likeness, have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fish of the water, have dominion over the water. Let the hand of man have dominion over the water. That's exactly what this says. But of course, we don't have any dominion. We're just following our script. But there's the script and the forensics with numerology from the origination of Genesis 1 verses 26, and then the hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt. So it predates anything in Torah and Judaism and Christianity, because we know it's tied to the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Thousands of years before the Bible came out. But here we are, just reverse engineering it and looking at all the forensics. All found from this show called Ancient Aliens that came out on March 8th, 2009, which March 8th, if you go to the calendar, March 8th is day number 67 and 68. 67 is tied to Yod Elohim, the numerology of it. Okay? We can go on and on and on with all these stuff, man. It's just so it's too perfect. It is too perfect. So here is the playing card in the French Gregorian system for March 8th. It's the Two of Spades. And in this system, how I learned from the great Sharon Jeffers, this is card number 41. Now, this is important because the word Elohim in Hebrew numerology is 41. Let us make man in our image. So again, the connections on this, Ancient Aliens comes out on March 8th. Ancient Aliens numerology matches the chapter and verse of Genesis 1 verses 26, talking about the Elohim making man in their image and giving them dominion over the sea and the air and the earth. And March 8th is the 41st card, the Two of Spades. Two is duality, the yin-yang. And why I have Uranus here is because Uranus is the ruler of that card. This is the master spirit spread and the master life spread. The spirit spread is what governs all the cards. You could say this is the spread of the divine, and there is the Uranus card sitting in the horizontal and the vertical line. So it looks like a bingo chart. The Two of Spades, card 41. So what this is saying is the Ancient Aliens, they're tying it to Uranus, which means heaven. And Uranus is the father of the sky. In the Anunnaki story, it's Anu that created Enki and Enlil. From ancient Sumeria, the oldest text that we have on the world stage recorded. See how all that works? And it's all tied to the Elohim. And the Elohim, of course, they originate from the Sumerian stuff, then Babylon, and then ancient Egypt. But what's so fascinating about the 41 and the 41 and the 41 being tied to Ancient Aliens is in Bob Lazar's new S4 documentary that just came out, they have the 41 splashed all over the documentary. Sitting inside the hangar where the UFOs were is this number 41 spray painted on the wall. It's got a big circle around it. This wasn't put here arbitrarily. This was put in there, Bob Lazar says this is what the number was that was on the wall in the hangar. If you go watch the documentary, which I have, this is exactly what he specifically says. Does Bob Lazar know all these connections? Does Bob Lazar know that the numerology of the word Elohim, which are the gods that created man and woman, has a numerical value of 41? Not unless he studies Hebrew and the forensics of the numerology behind it. Well, they didn't mention any of this stuff inside the documentary, but us here on this channel and being a forensic decoder, there are the solidifications. We already know that. And then on top of that, just with the ridiculousness of all this code and the producers and Prometheus and all that, and Kevin Burns passing on the Society of Jesus' birthday, you're going to see that in this presentation. You're going to see that more. So we're just getting this thing off with a bang. That's how we're starting this whole thing off, man. And now you can see how valuable all of these tools are as forensic decoders. So let's jump into more of this presentation. And here is the S4 main slide here. And doesn't S look like the number 5? Absolutely it does. S is the 19th letter. And the number 4, that's going to give you the 194. And what's 19 plus 4? 23. Well, again, I just go back up here. What was the 23s right there? 23andMe. DNA. Did you ever submit your DNA to 23andMe to get your family tree? What were they doing with all that information? I don't know. But 23andMe is 23 plus 23, and that's 46. 46 is the mirror of 64, the total possible codons in our DNA. And S looks like the number 5, and it links alchemically to these two elements, which you've seen in other presentations. I don't even have to narrate this for you. Xenon being tied to the love story, being tied to the sun, being tied to Zeus, the king of the gods in the Greeks. And chromium having the isotope 54, and we know this one is tied to the word shalom in Hebrew, which is good. Chromium is tied to chroma, which is light. So this is how we look at these symbols. Even though this is a letter and this is a number, these are symbols. And they can be converted alchemically into those two elements right there. So these are really big. So during the documentary of Area 51, which we broke down years ago, this was Bob Lazar drawing out a sketch of what made UFOs travel and move. And these, I can't remember the names of them, but this was what made the UFO craft move. And I pointed out that these are exactly in the shape of the flux capacitor. Without any question, they are. And you see, in the documentary of S4, he will tell you that the fuel for UFOs is moscovium, element 115. And moscovium is a synthetic element. It's not a natural element, which means you have to make it. And scientists can only make such small amounts that it just disappears within seconds. But you need 223 grams to fly a UFO. I'm going to show you the 223. But nonetheless, I'm convinced. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I'm convinced that these are the two elements that the aliens would need to make moscovium 289. And how I know that is because all you have to do is add up plutonium 244 and scandium 45, and you'll get 289. And if you add up the protons of plutonium 94 and scandium 21, you're going to get 115. Now, I popped this into AI, and of course, I told it this is theoretical, and it agreed. Yeah, the numbers match up completely, but there really isn't any documented information on this. But I'm convinced that these two elements are what's needed to create the fuel for the UFO ships. And is this why in Back to the Future and the flux capacitor, it has plutonium as the fuel? Well, whether or not Zemeckis knew that, whether or not the creators of Back to the Future knew that, is besides the point. Back to the Future coming out in 1985. If you were born in 1985, you're tied to the aliens even more because that's when Back to the Future came out. And time travel. And even the DeLorean. But I'm convinced that these two are going to be what is needed to create moscovium 289. You're talking about a radioactive element. And plutonium is tied to Shiva the Destroyer. And you're going to see that it's tied to Lucifer. Absolutely, I'm going to show you the evidence of that. Like we've already done so many times before. So many times before that we've shown this. So let's get into, we're just getting warmed up. Let's get into the very first topic now, not alone. What does that mean? Well, why are things considered and called top secret? Well, notice that the word top describes the word secret. Top is the adjective to describe the word secret, the subject. Well, it's got a 51 on it, which matches the protons of antimony. And of course, where is the top secret location? In Nevada. The Silver State, Area 51. And there's the 121. And this is the Eye of Horus. So now you're getting into ancient Egypt. If you slice your brain open in half, by the way, this is what you'll find. Every single one of you will have this located inside of your brain. So now we have a connection to the aliens and perhaps us being created and being ruled over, maybe. And maybe the aliens are the archons. And maybe we'll find out. But antimony, it means not alone. Comes from the Greek words antimonos. Well, can you start to see the script playing? What do you mean we're not alone? Yeah. And why are they coming out now? I'm going to back up. Why is all the alien stuff going to come out now? Why are we going to potentially have the reveal? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the age of Aquarius is ruled by what planet? Uranus. Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius. Uranus and Kronos, but Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius. And we're in the age of Aquarius. Is this why we are now going to be told that we're not alone and show the proof for it? And show the evidence for it? They're about ready to release this. Why now? Because we're in the age of Aquarius, which is the opposite of Leo. Leo is the sun, the regulator. The capital star of Leo is Regulus. It's a big thing right now on the world stage just for that alone. Area 51. Remember, the pyramid, the Great Pyramid slope is 51 degrees north. You go on and on. You're going to see this 51 quite a bit during this presentation. This one we covered in the They Live 2.0, Area 51 being tied to these two elements because they have the 51 attached to them. Again, it's all about chemistry. There's the antimony 121, and then there's the other element, vanadium 51. You ever see that show V, the miniseries from 1980s? The V. It was the reptilian aliens that visited the Nagas. Yeah. Well, there's the 23 again, tied to the word C in Hebrew. And then we've covered this, the Ace of Wands being the 23rd card and Area 51 having the Ace of Swords being card 51. They're both aces, right? They're both aces. The antimony symbol is the upside down Venus symbol, this is the symbol for Earth as well. This is the globalist symbol, the dominion over the Earth. You're starting to see all these connections. So when we covered in the Garden of Eden, the 2 trees decoded, these are the ones that I recommend you watch if you haven't seen them on the Patreon. Garden of Eden is 51 in the original Hebrew. Why would the Garden of Eden be 51 and why would it be tied to Area 51? Do you see the connections here, folks? I'm not trying to make anything fit here. And the alchemology of the Garden of Eden, 17 is garden and Eden is 34. Well, there it is. It's these two elements. It's all alchemology. It's all numerology into chemistry. And the Garden of Eden is tied to oxygen, which is the air that we breathe, and sulfur. And sulfur creates the eternal fire, the lake of fire. You're in it. And this forms the abbreviation of OS, as in operating system. And the only element that has the OS is osmium, as in the Wizard of Oz. And it has 76 protons, and that is tied to the Nephilim and the Book of Enoch, which was left out of the Bible, which talks about the fallen ones. Is this just talking about the aliens that came down and got situated and they live underground and under the water? You're going to see the under the water thing. And is that why let us make man in our image and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea? Why the sea was talked about first? Folks, this is all starting to come to a head now. And Nephilim, alchemically, is tied to selenium. Selenium is tied to the moon, because selenium is the Greek word for the moon, selene. Is this why we've never gone back to the moon? And now the Artemis, number 2, supposedly went back. But of course, there was some video footage that came out. Some where you can see it's staged. If you haven't seen that, leave a comment. I'll try to find it and send it to you. But it's one of those, what a fabricated production that is. But anyway, selenium has 34 protons. And I'm just going to go back up here, and Eden is 34. So Eden is tied to the moon. And the moon is tied to the Nephilim. Even the word Genesis, the first book of the Bible, is got a numerical value of 76. That's right. In the beginning is 76. If you're in the United States, you ever pump gas at station 76? Why is it 76? And why did the United States get formed on 1776? Just another mere coincidence, right? Anyway, let's get into now why it's all formed around water and the sea. Remember, let us make man in our image. Let him have dominion over the sea. Well, remember, this is all Piscean energy. Remember, Jesus was a fisher of men. He was the king of the Jews, and he was part of the fish story, the ichthys. What has the Navy got to do about this? Well, what does the naval branch run? They run the water. And when I watched the documentary, this is a real screenshot, Robert Lazar is narrating, and he's saying, this is the name tag that they gave me when I came to S4 to get into all the secured locations. So I've underlined what stood out to me. And it's why isn't it the Army? Why isn't it the Air Force? You're talking about unidentified flying objects. That's the air. Why would this not be the Air Force intelligence? Why is it the naval intelligence? Because it has to do with water. That's why. Naval has to do with water. And if you want to even go deeper, where's your navel located at? It's called your belly button. And the belly button is the umbilical cord, which connects you to the mother. Now you're talking about birth. It goes that deep, folks. It goes that deep. And of course, what is the navel connected to? The stomach. And the stomach is the solar plexus. And you're talking about the belly of the beast. I could go really deep with that. But let's talk about the potential. The potentiality of, and Jason Bashirs and I talked about this on our Underground Aliens, the last podcast we did about, and his chronology shows that all of the crafts come from under the water, not from outer space. They all come from under the water. Is this why Robert Lazar has a badge that has the naval intelligence on it? The naval is the water. Sea-based. Let us make man in our image. Let them give dominion over the sea. You see how it's all starting to come to a synchronicity here. The syncretism on this, folks, is humdinger central. And I personally have no doubt that's why it's the Department of Naval Intelligence, because the Navy has to deal with water. And the oceans take up 71% of the Earth's real estate. And the oceans are so deep and vast, and you could easily say this is the abyss and Sheol and Gehenna and all of the depths and all of the bottomless pit. These are tied to the oceans, folks. The water. We are made up of water. So I started to look at this. I started to study the aliens underwater. And there is a lot of information on this. You have Bermuda Triangle, where a lot of things disappear. You have Atlantis, the ancient civilization, being tied to water. So why is this tied to aliens? This guy, Burchett, who is a congressman, this is old. But it's either this guy or somebody else just came out and said this, that this guy is talking about disclosure. And he says, they tell me something's moving at hundreds of miles an hour underwater, as big as a football field. Is this all a hoax? Is this all just a distraction? Or is there some legitimacy to this? Like if you study the Jason Bashir's the podcast we did, he's like, everybody's told to look up, but go underwater. So I started to look at under the water through the historicity and the ancient texts. And if you go into the Hebrew and the Judaic, you're going to get Leviathan, the sea monster, who gets squashed. And if you go all the way back before that, because what predates Judaism is ancient Samaria, you're going to get the Tiamat, which is the same exact monster, the sea monster, that gets defeated. And Leviathan, Tiamat, now you're talking about aliens, and now you're talking about legitimacy here on connecting the dots. Okay? So these are real images of really deep sea creatures, and these things are what really look like aliens. The most, the most disturbing images, the most disturbing animals that we have on Earth. Some of them live in the water. Besides the insect kingdom, the sea creatures are really alien-like. These are not fake images. These are all real images that I got. Now you tell me, what would better describe the bottomless pit and Sheol and hell and, and being stuck in a prison than underwater? And is this where we got spawned from? So it's all starting to come to a head now, ladies and gentlemen. And then you go into the ancient story in India, which are the Naga people. And this will connect to the Vatican. I guarantee it will. And it does. And the Nagas are the serpent race. And this is tied to They Live. And this is tied to the miniseries called V. This is why, folks, I'm telling you, the disclosure, when you will look at this, the V miniseries from the 1980s right here. I watched this as a kid. Came out in 1983. And these were carnivorous. They came and they pretended like they were our friends. That's what they did. They came here. See? They're our friends. But that wasn't the case. People realized that they were coming here to try to exterminate the human race, take them over. You should go watch this series. This was scripted. The guy who created it, Kenneth. You should go watch this, folks. And what is that V? Well, what does Vatican start with? The V. Vaticanus. Vanadium. Starting to make sense to you now, folks? So, is that what's going to happen? There will be disclosure and they will be our friends? I don't know. Time will tell. I just don't know. But I do know that this is legit. Whether this is a rendition of an artist, it's legit. And these are legit. And this is coming. This is coming out. I don't see it any other way. Do you? But nonetheless, here we go. Here's the next topic, 41. And we already kind of gave that away. Here it is. Bob Lazar specifically says in the documentary, when I walked into the hangar with the UFO, he calls this the sport model, there was a 41 on the wall. Why is there a 41 spray painted on the wall or plastered on the wall or whatever? Why would that have to be highlighted and talked about? Well, you already know what the 41's tied to. But let me give you some deeper context, and we're going to go to religion. What would religion have to do with aliens? Well, again, Vatican. The Vatican starts with the letter V. And the V series, this. You're going to see, man. You're going to see. Anyway, we covered this in All Roads Lead to Rome. We went to the Latin cipher because Latin's numerology cipher is specific for its language because it has only 23 letters and the values are very case specific. The letter U doesn't have any value. There it is, the 0. neither does the W. But I showed all of you that the latitude of Vatican, which is 41, which is right there on the wall, is tied to the prime of the 179, and all roads lead to Rome is 179, using just the Latin numerology cipher. And how the connection of Jesus on the cross, of course, there's the letter Y. It's clear as day, sitting on the letter T, and it just so happens that Y and T is 41, which matches the word cross in Latin, 41, which matches their latitude north. Why are all these things matching up like this? Well, because it makes the script super tight. That's what it does. It's the branding. It's the branding of the script, so you know what you're dealing with. Okay? So the question is the story of Jesus just the story of an alien? Is he a clone? Time will tell, folks. But let me get into some more of the forensics. So I went back, and you know I like to do this. I wondered, what is the 41st word of the Torah? Starting in Genesis 1 verses 1, counting all of the words in total, what is the 41st word? It's frickin' the 41st numerology of Elohim. There it is. You got to go to Genesis chapter 1 verses 5, and there's the 41st word. Go fact check it yourself. This is how dialed in this is. And 41 is on the wall in the hangar of where they housed that sport model, etc., etc. And it's tied to the Vatican. What's going on over there? Why is the Vatican a Christian sect, but they're using information based on Judaism? What is going on here? Well, we're going to find out. So just for fun, I'm making the connections. And again, this is just simply how code breaking works. This is how the forensics works. You start looking at things and you start to connect. And this, I will tell you, this is very loose because I don't really use the Strong's Concordance. This is the Strong's Concordance, but somebody created this. And the question would be, did they create it based upon the numerology of the word Catholic? Because the origination of Catholic comes from the Greek. The New Testament's written in Greek. And you go back to the origination of the Greek, it's the isopsophy, which is the similarity of the Hebrew gematria. The first ciphers created in the Greek is called isopsophy. And there's the match. So are we fitting everything? Well, no, because we have the connections here. We have the connections here. We have the connections here. And we have a connection here. And then the Rome is tied to Catholicism. And Catholic is the 430, which is the number that is assigned to the word Elohim in the Strong's Concordance. This is not a coincidence. This is chasing the code and finding the connections and seeing the script and how it's all connected and how it's so perfect. And this is how all this stuff works. So let's keep going with this. How many total letters are there to reach that 41st word, which is Elohim? 158. So there's 158 total letters to reach the 41st overall word, starting in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1, going to Genesis 1, verses 5, finding that 41st word. And of course, it is Elohim, which is let us make man, plural, not one, several. And it's a total of 158 letters. And this is very, very fascinating because during the documentary, they specifically mention this poster that Bob Lazar sees on the wall that somebody created. He doesn't know how it got there. And it says, they're here. So he says, I went up and I touched it and it was a real poster. Somebody actually made this. And what I found right away, of course, I'm always looking for the clues, is what was displayed on the freaking clock. Well, it was 1:25. Either it was AM or PM, but the second hand was right on that number 8. And there it is. It's the 1, the 5, and the 8. So again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, this is how I know that we are living in a freaking scripted reality. The 158 is on that clock. He's talking about the poster, they're here. And of course, what are the words that are used here? They're here. How about, who is it? It's they. They're here. They live. Huh. Oh, I know. This is just another mere coincidence. John Carpenter, who created They Live, said it was just a movie. Trying to connect it to Ronald Reagan, who was the president back in the 1980s. The same time frame that the guy that created Prometheus Productions and David Wilcock and all these alien producers. They live. They're here. You could have used any other word, set of words. There could have been any other time on that clock with the second hand, but nope, the 158 is the 158 letters which form the 41st word. The 41st word of the Torah, which is the Elohim, which is on the wall in the hangar of where the UFO was being held. Do you see the connections to all of this? 41 is the 13th prime number. I hope you, and 13 is Mem, which is water. Remember the water. Let man have dominion over the sea. The sea is first. Jesus walked on water. Jesus was a fisher of men. Why is all this water reference here? Well, are these crafts coming from underwater? Even NASA, they train under the freaking water. NASA does. They train under the water. Could all of the space programs be just fabricated under the water? Naval intelligence. So let's keep going. We're getting fun with this. We're having fun with this. So this 158, of course, I'm going to connect it to an element on the periodic table. So we get another bridge, right? Gadolinium. It's got the big GD on it. In the Jewish faith, this is one way they spell out God. G-D. I'm not making that up. That's a fact. We know gadolinium is tied to Uran television. And the most abundant isotope of gadolinium, meaning its strongest one, is 158. And when you add up the neutrons, protons, and electrons, there's gadolinium being on television. When you add up the neutrons, protons, and electrons of gadolinium, you just simply add up the protons with the isotope, you get 222. And I remembered what that 222 was tied to. It's tied to radon. Radon. And it's tied to the number 86. I have this decode coming out on 86th. 86 is a slang getting kicked out, getting rid of. Well, could it be that this is tied to the fallen angels story? They got kicked out of heaven? It fits into the story, folks. I'm not saying it's true. Fiction or nonfiction all make up this swirling script that we're living out. But you're seeing the connections. You're seeing the connections all found from the freaking time on the wall, and they're here. They're here. See, so this becomes so much more legitimate because of this. Just because of that poster on the wall makes it more legit in the story of all things. So then I'm adding this up now, right? I'm going to chase it. Since we did it here, I'm going to do it here. What's 86 plus 222? 308. What number is this attached to? Well, just the release date of They Live in 1988. See, November 4th, 1988, it was a leap year, so it officially was the 309th day of the year. But see, when you look at this from the forensics, you look at the common and leap, and the common year day is 308. See? So we're not trying to fit this to give you some, I'm not trying to bedazzle you. I'm not trying to get anything past you here, folks. I'm telling you, this is how the forensics work. To legitimize the they live and the ancient aliens and all this stuff. Because a lot of people that this cult following, they say this is a documentary. Anyway, let's keep going. Let's get into more of the 41. Since we know it was sitting in the hangar, well, you know what? Guess what? I went to the very first book of the New Testament, Matthew chapter 1, verses 1. Do you know that one? Do you know that scripture? You should know it. Why do we want to study Matthew chapter 1, verses 1? Because Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 is the very first scripture of the New Testament. So it's a big deal. This is the 40th book, the very first book of the Greek scriptures. So Christianity is hinged upon this. This is the official de facto book number 1, chapter number 1, verse number 1 of Christianity is Matthew, which is one of the 4 main gospels. And Matthew's the tax collector. And the tax collector, in my opinion, is going to be tied to Aquarius. And here we are talking about the aliens and Uranus ruling over Aquarius. Here we go. Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 is the very first time that talks about the generation of Jesus Christ. And you go all the way through Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 16, and you're going to get these names right here. And this is where the error comes into play, and this is how I know someone goofed. What do I mean by that? Because Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 goes through Matthew chapter 1, verses 16, and that talks about the 42 generations. The 42 generations, 3 sets of 14. But Matthew goofed because there are not 42 people. There are only 41. So there's a discrepancy already, and I've done presentations on the 42, but again, it doesn't matter if it's fiction or nonfiction. It's all part of the script that's swirling around and ruling over our reality. But the legitimacy of this, there are, from Abraham to Jesus, there are 41 people in the begoting. Begot means birth, of Abraham and David all the way down to Jesus. Jesus is the last of the 41. He is the 41st. So think about what I'm showing you. Jesus is the 41st in the lineage and the generations from Abraham to David all the way down to the final frontier of Jesus. So he becomes the 41st name in that lineage, not the 42nd, the 41st, and the word Elohim has a numerical value of 41, and in the hangar, sat on the wall 41. And here we are. And the numerology of Jesus in the modern Greek, 87. And it tipped me off because I knew that it's tied to Francium. You just simply connect, right? Francium has 87 like what clue can we get from this? The 223, which is the mirror of the 322, right? You know, that skull and bones, that evil 322. Well, the 223 is connected to the documentary The S4 because Bob Lazar holds up this piece of Moscovium, and you notice it's in the shape of a V, and he says, this is the fuel for the UFO. And it has 223 grams of Moscovium is needed. So I knew because I have these memorized. So again, what would the odds be? That Jesus is number 41. 41 is on the wall in the hangar of where the UFO is housed. 41 is the Elohim. It's the 41st word in the Torah is Elohim, who are the gods that make man to rule over the sea. And Bob Lazar has a name tag with naval intelligence, and Navy runs the water and the sea. And then you get into Area 51, which is top secret, and the coordinates of this, which we've shown, which nobody else talks about, matches the protons of Moscovium, which is the fuel needed for UFO travel, according to Bob Lazar. Coincidence? No, not at all. legitimate connections. Again, just notice the shape. It's in the shape of the letter A and the letter V. Either one. And that'll give you 122. A is 1, V is 22, 122. And that's going to give you tellurium, which is Earth. But when you add up the coordinates of Area 51, 37 and 115, you're going to get 152. You can do this with your latitude, longitude. We've come out with the book, Alchemical Cities, how important this is. But Area 51 gives us a total value of 152, which connects to this number right here in mathematics, 881. 881 is the 152nd prime number. I'm going to go back, and the latitude, longitude of Area 51, where Bob Lazar worked on the S4 project, is 152. So 881 is the prime of the 152, or the 152 is the prime of 881. And you know where I got the 881 from? The numerology in Chaldean of the 41 men in the lineage of Jesus being born out of Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to David, etc. There it is. The numerology of all 41 is 881, which is the 152nd prime number. So it just goes back to Area 51 again. Folks, I'm telling you, is all this points to Jesus and all of these being tied to aliens. The whole thing is all tied to it. And religion's going to have a big problem. And you're going to hear it. You're going to hear him say, these are the demons. You're going to hear it. That's for sure. You're going to hear this, folks. So going back to this 41. Elohim 41. Moscovium is 41. Even, which I've shown this, even in Chaldean, which is pre-Chaldean, even this, what is Area 51 called? Paradise Ranch. That's 41. So Paradise Ranch is 41, which is what Area 51 is called. Moscovium is 41. There's a 41 on the wall during the documentary, and Elohim is 41. And Vatican City sits at 41, as does the Society of Jesus. Huh. What is going on here? Well, again, Moscovium is the fuel needed to fly the craft, according to Bob Lazar. And the protons of Moscovia matches the longitude of Area 51. Not an accident, of course. Completely in line. And even the word alien is 41. Now, I know I'm mixing and matching, but at this point, it's just so blatant. It's just so blatant. When you say 41, it becomes 118, and I knew that the word Christ, Christos, is 118. Again, so Jesus being the 41st, 41 being 118, and 118 being the numerology of Christos in the original Greek. Yeah, what are the odds? Well, extremely amazingly well, and coincidental always. It's always coincidental. So speaking of the Christos, let's get into one of the biggest organizations that promote Jesus, and that is the Society of Jesus. We're going to get into IHS. These men right here, the formation, Ignatius of Loyola, back in the year 1540. This was before the Gregorian calendar was ever out. This was still on the Julian calendar. They formed on September 27th, 1540. And I already told you that this guy right here, Kevin Burns, died on September 27th, which is the formation date of the Jesuits. Just another mere coincidence, of course. Anyway, it's the 271st day of the year. That's a prime number. 271 is the 58th prime number, and it's tied to they live. They're here. So are these people, could they be trapped? And do they want to play? Is that what this whole thing is all about? I mean, there's the symbol. This is the symbol of the mask. This is the chromosome, the Y chromosome, which determines it to be a male. So we're all dudes. All men, no women. 271 is the 58th prime. And it leads to the word they, as in they live. Remember, they're here, the poster. Do you see the connections? These connections are crazy. And then this one hit me hard. So when you read these narrations, you pay attention to this. What's the biggest word that stands out in that statement? Science. Because it says Bob Lazar's life is rooted. His orientation is science. Of course, science comes from psi, and the letter psi in Greek is 23. Psychology, science, psychiatrist. Well, it's tied to psi, and that's tied to another big one is this, folks. I'm gonna do this on the fly and show you. We're gonna go into the Greek alphabet. And what is the psi? Right here. Psi. It's the 23rd letter. Remember what the 23 was tied to? The C. The numerology of the word C, which I think I still have right here. I just went past it. Here's the C. I'll get it right here. There's the C. We're going to go right back to the Hebrew. We're going to get the Hebrew cipher. And there's C. So the word C, right there, you can't include the hey is the, but that's the C right there. That's 23. 23 and me, DNA. And Genesis 1 verses 26, let them have rulership over the sea. That's the C first. And the 23rd letter in the Greek alphabet is psi, as in science. Who has the pitchfork? Poseidon. Psi, Poseidon. What does Poseidon rule over? The water. He rules over the water. And what happens when the woman has her water breaks? She delivers a baby. So you see how all this is connected just from looking at this word science. Psi comes from the Greek letter psi, which is tied to Poseidon's trident, which is tied to water. Is all this technology coming from under the water? Science. And the 58, they. Trapped. This is my birth card. So why do you think I'm here to show you this? I got to sign this roll. So when you go look at the numerology, when you go look at the astronomy, the astrology of the year 1540 on September 27th, when the Jesuits were formed, the Society of Jesus, this is what it looked like. I can't give you the two-dimensional because Mastering the Zodiac doesn't go back beyond 1900. So we got to go to the stellarium, and it tells everything. Look at what we got. Virgo, the virgin. Jesus being born of a virgin. And he was a fisher of men. That's Pisces. He was born during the Piscean age. This is what the story says. I didn't make that up. And Pisces is ruled by who? Poseidon. There's Poseidon, Neptune. Go look it up. Neptune's so small you can't see it, but there's the X. Neptune was in its own sign in the year 1540 when the Jesuits were created, the Society of Jesus, along with a full moon. The moon is the god of sin in the ancient Mesopotamia, and Jesus is going to take your sins away. And across from Pisces is Virgo, and what's sitting in Virgo? Mercury and Venus, which sit directly across from one another in the Kabbalah tree. Mercury and Venus represent the left and right hand paths, and they have the same exact symbol, the spirit, the circle with the cross. Mercury has the crescent moon. The moon's right across from the way, and you got Poseidon there. Mercury rules Virgo, Poseidon rules Pisces. They are in their home signs during the formation of the Society of Jesus. You don't think this is scripted? This is absolutely so freaking scripted, I don't even know what to tell you. So you go and dig a little bit deeper, you go to the Society of Jesus, here's their headquarters, their main church. So located in Rome, of course. And look at the location, look at the address, 54. Could have been any other number. Nope. 54. 41 degrees latitude north, of course. There's the Elohim. But why 54? Well, maybe because of this. See, Rome is Italy. We go to the Italian. The Latin cipher. Excuse me. The church and the Society of Jesus is Latin. Well, you go to the Latin cipher. There's the word they matching the 4 initials in their logo. Clearly, it's an IHS with a T there. Jesus sits on the T. Well, there's the 54. They live. Why is it 54 Piazza for their headquarters? Could have been 50, could have been 49, could have been 42. Why 54? Well, maybe because it had to match this, to match the logo. And remember, we started this thing off. The S4 is the 54, and there's the chromium and the xenon. And xenon this is tied right to Zeus. And Zeus is the brother of Poseidon and Hades. The trifecta, the trimurti in the Vedic tradition. In the Greek tradition. So we're going to chase this even more, and we're going to look at the motto of the Jesuits. See how it says it's Latin. So you go to the Latin cipher, and it's the glory of God. For the glory of God, there it is. Well, that's 164. We go to chemistry to bridge it, dysprosium, dysprositos. And it's got 66 protons, and there's the clue to connect it. Because Jesuit in Latin, there's the spelling of it. It's right there. Latin. You got to use the proper cipher. So we connect the title of this organization with their motto, and to bridge it, we use chemistry. Remember, my mouth is 164. I'll spit you out of my mouth. That's Jesus talking. Yeah, well, this is Society of Jesus. But the 66 is big because it's tied to these 2 words. From Latin again, Venatus is where you get vanadium from. Vanadium was named by Venatus. I got the duality in there just for shits and giggles. Going back to the Area 51 again. Remember 23, tied to the sea? Tied to Poseidon. Poseidon is Brahma in the Vedic, who's the god of generation. He's the generator god. Generate, operate, destroy. That's Poseidon. The god of the seas. Well, you just keep chasing this, man. The V, remember this show, The Boys? Great show. Compound V. Gave the superheroes their power. I just wanted to throw that in there. Not the first time I've shown that. But now let me give you the connections to Lucifer now. Are you ready? I have a huge connection to this title. Huge. I can't even tell you how connected I am to the Lucifer character. It's insane for me personally. So this is what caught my eye. Is Lazar's talking during the documentary of what makes UFOs move. It's element 115. And he said in the documentary that the melting point of Moscovium is a 1,740 degrees Celsius. And I knew, because I know the numbers, I knew what the 174 is tied to. We know that it's tied right to this. If I go to the periodic table, what element has the 174? Lutetium. It's also going to be ytterbium as well. Ytterbium is going to have the 174. Right there. Ytterbium is actually the main element that has that. But the big takeaway was the 174, and I knew that the numbers of 174 were the numbers of Lucifer according to Manly P. Hall. So I pulled up his book, and I did some research on it. And here is, starting in his book, starting in the very beginning of it, and going all the way down to where that 741 is listed. Lucifer is represented by the number 741. There it is. So here's the numerology of all of it. I'm not concerned about the outcome, the total. I'm concerned about this. How many words? What is the 204th word? 741. 204 words, 741. I knew that that's tied to Mercury. How long have we been talking about Mercury and what it's tied to? It's tied to the dragon being hurled down. And Mercury's tied to Prometheus. Prometheus is the one that stole fire, gave it to the humans. The serpent in the garden is the one that stole and gave Eve the knowledge. So now you definitely have a connection with Lucifer here. Again, it doesn't mean that it's factual, but it's connected to it. And just to give you some insight, I went to and I started looking at the invocation of these deities. You could say demons, and you got to know what demons are and what that means. It's tied to the shadow side. But this is a legitimate forum, and this person right here has invoked Lucifer. So he gives you this entire script to read to do it. And what he's done to successfully invoke the spirit of Lucifer. So when you go and read about all this stuff, you'll see how many things are connected to Lucifer. Janus, the two-faced god in the Romans. Atar. Lucifer being tied to Samael in the Hebrew, in the Talmud. Lucifer being tied to Prometheus. And we know Prometheus is tied to Mercury. Mercury's not mentioned here, but we know that Mercury's tied to Prometheus. So now you have a connection of Lucifer being tied to Prometheus and Mercury. We have Lucifer being tied to the book of Enoch and Shem-Yaza and Azazel, who are part of the 200 fallen ones, and Mercury's average isotope is 200. And it just goes on, and you start to see that this guy right here, who has invoked Lucifer successfully, as amongst so many other people in this forum, you can see how it's all connected. The morning star, the solar beast, the evening star, Venus. I mean, when you get down to brass tacks on all this, ladies and gentlemen, it's not just one energy. So I can't say anymore that Mercury's just Prometheus, because we know that it's more than that. And now that we have evidence of somebody who doesn't even study any of this code, I know for a fact this person doesn't, but they're claiming to show that Lucifer's tied to Prometheus, and we know Prometheus is tied to Mercury. We already made the connections of that. Well, then you go into the origination of Lucifer, which is a Latin word. The Latin Vulgate is what created the word Lucifer from Isaiah 14 verses 12, which is a Hebrew, which is Halil. That's going to give you a value of 39. But Lucifer in the Latin is 51, and you go right back to that area 51 again. Area 51 in the Latin is 75, and you just go back to the Hebrew right here, and there's Halil in the full Hebrew gematria. 75. 379 is the 75th prime number. And why is this a big deal? Remember, back up. Lucifer, Halil in Hebrew gematria, in the original Isaiah 14 verses 12, it's He, Yod, Lamed, Lamed. 75 value. 379 in mathematics is the 75th prime. Why is this a big deal? Well, I wonder why the calling code of Vatican City is 379. Why did they choose that? Did they choose it on purpose? Did they know that 379 is the 75th prime? And do they know that the full gematria of the origination of Lucifer in Isaiah 14 verses 12 in the Old Testament is 75? I wonder if they know that. Well, remember, Vatican starts with the letter V, and the V, the miniseries, the aliens. See how it's all starting to come together, folks? All of it is starting to come out. And you get a way big head start, because the majority of the world will never see any of this information. You are the 1% of the 1%. Maybe even the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. So let's talk about the blood now. Our blood's made of water. Have a lot of navel, the belly button, tied to the mother, the dome, the stomach can be the dome. There's so much information on this, but how about the blood? The blood is sacred. Well, we'll go back to this Genesis 1 verses 26. The El, let us make man, it's let us. Let them rule over the sea. Sea's made of water. Our blood's made of water. We've covered the blood so many times in so many presentations, and we have the 8 known blood types with the RH factors. And you're either going to be a positive or negative. If you are a positive, you have the RH factor. If you're a negative, you do not have the RH factor. Well, the total value is 286. And that number, ladies and gentlemen, is tied to one of the other isotopes of moscovium. So now you have this connection of the aliens being tied to our DNA and our blood. And we already made the connections of the Elohim being tied to the 41, the Hanger, the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, the Vaticanus, Bob Lazar, and the S4 documentary. We already have all of this stuff connected successfully. But then we bring in the theology to give it one more extra step. And this is a technique called theonumerology. We've been doing this for years. And you could do this with any scripture. You simply take the scripture in question. In this case, it's the very first time, the only time that Lucifer is Halil is mentioned. Let's use the proper Halil is mentioned in the Old Testament. Isaiah 14 verses 12. So you go all the way back to Isaiah chapter 1 and you add up all the verses. We've done this with the number of the beast. We've done this with the I am. Look at what it adds up to. 286. Is this why Jesus is said in John 8 verses 44, ye are of your father the devil? Well, the numbers are here, folks. The numbers are here. I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. This is because you know what's fascinating. This story, if you read the whole context, it's a story about a king of Babylon, who becomes very pompous. So it's an allegorical, but then of course there's more to the story. And here we are, connected to this 286. And I go back to the 66 element dysprosium because we know the melting point, the only element on the Royal Society of Chemistry's website that has a melting point of 1412 degrees Celsius, the only one that has the 1412 is dysprosium. The melting point, that means blood. 1412 matching chapter 14, verse 12. And why this is so important? Remember, because of this. Because the Jesuits, which promote Jesus, who defend Jesus, they are the militants of the church, have a numerical value of 66. Their motto is 164. Dysprosium's most abundant isotope is 164, and dysprosium has a melting point of 1412, which matches chapter 14, verses 12, which connects to the 286, which connects to the 286, which connects to Area 51 and what's needed to make space travel possible with UFOs, and it's connected to our blood types. Do you see the connections to this? See, an average person that doesn't do a forensics, they would say, you're just trying to connect. You can do this with anything. Yeah, this is a system that we've developed over the years. And you can do it with anything. But you got to know where to look. So to end this long presentation up, let's end with experiment. Because that's what I feel we're in. We're in an experiment. Experiment in the Latin is 121, matching top secret in the English. I know we're mixing. But why I'm showing you the experiment, because when you do it in the English, it matches the Greek. You know what this is? Prometheus. Prometheus is the one that stole fire and gave it to humans. Prometheus is tied to Lucifer. Lucifer's tied to the serpent. The serpent's tied to the dragon. The dragon's tied to Mercury. Mercury's tied to Azazel. Azazel's tied to Samyaza. And there are 200 watchers, and 200 is tied to Mercury's weight. And Xenon's tied to Zeus. And Zeus's best buddy is Prometheus. He gets mad at him. He chains him to the rock. And then Judaism, they cast the serpent out and puts him on his belly. Same story. The Greeks got Prometheus. The Jews got the serpent. But are we just this experiment to see how we handle this information? I mean, there's the revelation. There's the numbers to back it up. There's the numbers to back it up. 145 is promethium. I got my Mercury in the 61st gate of human design, folks. What do you think is channeling through me to tell you this? So are we just an experiment to see how we're going to handle all this kind of stuff? To see what kind of reactions? We're in a movie. Like a rat in a cage experiment. We're being run through a simulation. A simulation is an experiment. That's why the simulation comes in here. A simulation is an experiment. You can do it with AI. You can tell AI, run these simulations, and it'll give you an outcome. The outcome is the experiment. The experiment is, hey, I'm going to test these rats to see what's going to happen with them. That's a simulation. Earth is a movie, aka a simulation. And now you have all of the connections to see how all these cultures, they all have it right. But maybe, just maybe, ladies and gentlemen, there is a race that is going to finally come out and show themselves and maybe tell the world, hey, we created you and you're in a movie, man. You're being controlled. Maybe finally that will have disclosure. I don't know. But time will tell. So there you go, really long. And of course, how many slides did I have? 80. Yeah, I didn't plan it. I laughed when I looked before I went on. 80 slides, 80's Mercury. Mercury's tied to the aliens, folks. Aliens are tied to Jesus. Jesus is tied to Venus. Venus sits across from Mercury. And all this is going to come out. Aquarius is the liberation. So let me know if you saw anything during this presentation. It was a long one, I know. Thanks for sticking with me. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. Not everybody will. But if you did, congratulations. That's all I got for today. My name is Logan for Decode Your Reality. Until next time, we will see you later.